My name is Aneka Ingold, and I'm really happy to be here this afternoon to share with you a little bit about my artwork and also talk a little bit about what winning the Bennett Prize has meant to me, which I'll go into a little bit later. I'm going to talk about my current work and how I got to this point in my artistic development and in my career, starting with my undergraduate degree at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan, which is where I'm from originally. I got my DFAC there in painting, and that's so
we really can't hear back. No, it's not. So loud. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm glad you told me. How is this?
Better.
Okay, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my current body of work, but I'm gonna first kind of explain to you how I got to this point in my artistic development. I'm gonna go way back to my undergraduate degree to kind of talk about where my ideas started to formulate. So I went to Grand Valley State University, which is in Allendale, Michigan, which is where I'm originally from. And it was there that I received the Alexander Calder Honor Scholarship. I had been making art up until that point, mostly based on working from photographs. And so when I went to Grand Valley, it was where I started to understand the importance of working from life. So here are a couple drawings that I did in one of my first drawing classes at Grand Valley. I still got to be able to see my note cards. And drawing from observation in a traditional program really excited me because I hadn't worked from life before. And so we spent hours drawing from still lifes, but what really engaged me was working from the human form. I preferred the model always because drawing the figure always felt a little bit like I was asking a question about myself. Who am I? And what does it mean to understand my own body? And it was like looking into a mirror. It provoked questions for me about identity. I continued to take drawing classes, and here's a series of hand studies I did. Hands in different positions, holding different objects. And what I realized is that my drawings could start to tell a story, especially when a position of the hand was changed or there was something, an object involved that could start to make a connection between the figure and a symbol. And maybe it was a simple story, but it provoked thought in me. I realized I wasn't just trying to render life, I was trying to say something with the work. And after I finished my foundations programs, doing all the drawing and the rigorous basic classes, I had to choose an emphasis area, and so I chose to become a painting major. This is one of the paintings I did in my intermediate painting class. It was a really traditional program. We were told to only use oil paint and render realistically. And so a lot of it was drawing from models, or painting from models, and then using myself as a model as much as I could because that was the person that was always accessible to me. But I continued to be interested in the figure, the organic form. Now I had added elements of color and texture with the paint. And the skin was always something that interested me, and the different facets of the colors and the textures. But beyond the technical skills that I was acquiring, I continued to want to tell a story with my work. So the Stubble Self-Portrait was an experimentation with the idea of allegory and using objects such as the hanger and the shirt that you see, creating some connections between the figure and the symbol, and trying to provoke these relationships. It might not be a straightforward story, it might be a little cryptic, but at the same time, there are many different ways you could start to read into it. And I wasn't really concerned about an answer. It was more about just starting to see what that felt like to have objects and figures together in that same space. So I was compelled to continue to use the body as a vehicle for emotion. The more I made paintings about the female figure, the more I was interested in exploring societal expectations and pressures on women to have the perfect body, and analyze how women were objectified in our media and in our society at large. And often I realized women weren't seen as a whole. Women hadn't been seen as whole people. They were kind of seen as parts and sort of deconstructed. And so this piece was about that feeling of being reduced to just some parts and not being seen as a whole person. Oops, sorry. Making these paintings brought out a lot of turmoil for me. I had trouble understanding my own body as a young woman, and I started to feel some resentment because of the misogyny that I witnessed around me. And the paint responded to these feelings. My mark making became a lot more spontaneous and aggressive, and I felt opened up to working in a different way. Rather than this kind of tight, highly rendered technique, I started working more intuitively and just sort of letting the mark making happen. And it was not calculated and precise. I really let myself go and was motivated by my emotions, which was very liberating. And although I was taking all these painting classes and working with the figure and trying to understand, what stories I wanted to tell, I continued to take drawing classes. And here are a couple portraits that I did from my intermediate drawing class, which required me to experiment with materials and color palette. And so I ventured into oil pastels, and I started using really bright, garish colors, and sort of stylizing the figure a little too, and just kind of seeing what that would feel like, trying different media and exploring color. These are some more figures I did in that intermediate class, trying to understand how I could use color to draw attention to certain areas of the figure or the piece, and treating the color as a way to kind of get an emotional response. I could also use line quality to do that, to provoke a sort of push and pull of creating the illusion of movement, or creating the illusion of the figure remaining static. At this time, I was really intrigued with the Austrian painter Egon Schiele. His paintings from the early 1920s displayed female bodies in really seductive poses, also using a lot of expressive line and color. And the women were really eroticized, but I was also really intrigued by the way they seemed to possess some power in it, and there was a presence, and in their gaze, they seemed to be looking back at the viewer. And I really wanted to try and capture that in my own work. I continue to feel a need to work intuitively and experiment with media. So this was my advanced drawing class, one of the last drawing classes I took at GVSU, and I just started combining all kinds of things. I was kind of moving away from oil paint, and I started using acrylic paint because I thought it was a little more, it was easier to use at a fast pace. And I also used charcoal, I used graphite, I used colored pencil, oil pastel, and I even started to incorporate 3D elements such as fabric and ribbons. And I really liked not being tied down to any one way of working. It really kept me interested in the piece, and the stories just sort of created themselves, and I didn't overanalyze them. And during this time, I was looking at the artist R.B. Tai, the American painter, prolific from the 60s, 70s, and I responded to the disorienting environments that he was creating. He kind of played with this idea of perspective, combining highly rendered figures with sort of flat space. And I liked how the overlapping planes in his work sort of resembled collages and just sort of skewed the environment. Then it was time for my BFA show, and I had to kind of reel all of this creative energy in. Although I had tried many ways of working, I kind of had to focus on one thing, and because I was a painting major and the program was very traditional, my instructor pushed me to go back into the direction of oil painting and realism. So I made a series of really large-scale paintings of the body cropped, the female body sort of fragmented. And in retrospect, I think this is how I felt as both a woman and an artist at the time. These are really large scale. They were 5 feet by 6 feet paintings. I wanted to capture a really intimate moment and then blow it up, sort of magnify it, and make it confrontational and really voyeuristic. I was trying to understand my body on a deeper level and kind of try and see that it had both fragility and power at the same time, but also kind of create this ambiguity. You know, just by focusing on one part of the body became something else, almost like a landscape, really sort of visceral and foreign. And in that last semester of working at Grand Valley, I was looking at Jenny Saville, who was associated with the YBA, the Young British Artists in the 90s. And in my final year, I really wanted to be looking at women artists, women who were making art about women. And her work, Jenny Saville's work, her female figures were just so defiant and overpowering. And I really wanted to be able to capture that in my own work because she did such a good job of sort of confronting the male gaze. And this is me, my last year at Grand Valley. I did receive the Advanced Visual Arts Scholarship that year, which I was really proud of. And here I am right after graduation, standing with my paintings from the BFA show. So you can kind of get an idea of the scale here. And you can also get an idea for how cool my pants were at this time. I wish I still had those. But after I graduated, I didn't really know what to do because I had tried so many different ways of working. And I didn't know what direction to head in. I still had a lot to figure out. I also didn't have anyone telling me what I should or shouldn't do anymore. So after I graduated, I tried to combine the things that I had learned. So I did still continue to do highly rendered oil paintings of body parts, and still incorporate some colorful and inventive sort of allegories. I was kind of trying to ask myself how the symbols and even a silhouette of a figure could change the way that the body was interpreted and what connections could be made. So I just kept juxtaposing flat with highly rendered and playing with perception and trying to provoke a questioning of how the figure exists in the space. Trying to understand how to use a language of symbols. But I still wasn't really satisfied with this way of working. I showed this work locally at LaFontaine Galleries in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I also had a job there as a frame designer for a few years. And I was able to sell my work there and, and have an occupation in my field. And I did that for a little while, and then I did end up losing a little momentum because I had a baby. And that became my whole world. So having a family and a job meant that studio time really wasn't the priority anymore. I still continued to try and find ways to fit it in, And I painted this portrait of my son Spencer when he was about 2 years old. And once I started painting again, I really wanted to go back to school. I realized that my MFA was the next step for me. And so I applied to Kendall College of Art and Design, which is in Grand Rapids, right where I was living, and got accepted into the drawing program there. So this brings us to the body of work that I did when I was in graduate school. I really wanted to explore mixed media again. I didn't really want to be tied down to anything traditional, and the drawing program there was known for being really open-minded and flexible for interpretations of what drawing could be. So working with the professors there, it was a really wonderful learning environment for me. So these are the first two pieces that I did. I used both acrylic paint and drawing materials on paper. I worked really intuitively, and I made things up as I went. And it was real catharsis to get back in the studio and just sort of create things and be inventive and not worry about what the outcome was going to be. It helped me understand myself, and it helped me realize how important motherhood was to me, and that I needed to tell some stories about that. Here's another piece that I did called Mother and Daughter, which was about processing my relationship with my own mother. Once I became a mother myself, it changed my relationship with my own mother. And she was having a lot of health issues at the time when I started graduate school. I had very little control over what she was going through, and the art making really helped me kind of process all of my feelings about that. After working through some raw emotions about motherhood, I went a little deeper into my subconscious, relying on symbols to tell a story. I didn't really question why I was choosing these symbols. I just spent time with them, I let them exist, and I started to refine my approach again. I was, previous to this, working a little more spontaneously, and my art making was a little more childlike and aggressive. And I started to kind of hone my skills and started to work a little more tightly and focused on rendering. But instead of using oil paint, this time I used Prismacolor pencils. And I really fell in love with them. So here's a picture of me in my studio at Kendall. And I had really figured out a new process. I developed a system that really worked for me. It's the way that I continue to work in my studio today. But I rely heavily on my intuitions. I start by looking at a collection of images from books or magazines or photographs that I've taken. I search for both contemporary and historical references to get inspiration from. And then I combine these pictures in different ways to begin to form a narrative. Occasionally I'll work from life. If I need to, I'll use myself as a model. But often, just the way that my life works right now, I don't always have access to models. So I mostly work from images now. I work on gessoed Stonehenge paper. I usually then layer acrylic paint on top of that. And then after I've gotten down some large areas of shape that I want to render over, I start adding Prismacolor pencils, and I also use paint pens, acrylic paint pens, to render the figures. Sorry, I lost my place for a second there. And then when the narrative starts to form, I just sort of follow it. I don't make a really solid plan before I start. It just kind of comes together as I work. If I control it too much, it sort of loses excitement for me, and then I stop learning from it. So that is how I continue to work today. It's not usually so premeditated. It just sort of happens as I go. The narratives always involve a female figure because that's what I am, and it's what I relate to, it's what I know. I can sort of live vicariously through the female figure. Sometimes there's multiple figures, but I can find myself in them, and it helps me sort of understand a little bit better myself as a woman. The woman usually exists in an interior space or a landscape, and often there are animals involved and inanimate objects, and these are the things that sort of create her world or her story. And often the women are facing some kind of a challenge, which provokes some questions. In this piece called Blind Contemplation, the woman's braided hair sort of tethers her to the ground and then becomes a winding rug on the floor that is to be walked on. But her hair is also gently cradling a wild animal and showing some tenderness. And through this piece, I realized I was sort of investigating the roles, the domestic roles that women play in the home, and using symbols to talk about that. While I was in graduate school, I looked at a lot of female artists associated with the 1930s Surrealist movement. Frida Kahlo is one of my all-time favorite artists, but also Lenora Carrington and Dorothea Tanning had a huge influence on me. The Surrealist movement was really to challenge reality, and these women tried to free themselves from reason and order and created some dreamlike worlds that were full of symbolism. And these women often expressed their own personal stories and what it meant to them to be a woman at that time in history, and confronted some of the norms and standards of society. So here's a piece I did called I Love You to Death, side by side with one of Frida Kahlo's pieces called The Love Embrace of the Universe. And I wanted to show them side by side to show her influence on me. And Frida's work often explored maternal roles, which really spoke to me. I was really fascinated with the way that she used her symbols and dream logic to create her own worldview. And here's a piece by Lenora Carrington, a self-portrait she did that had a huge impact on my piece called Recognize the Waiting. Her compositions were often full of strange and unexpected juxtapositions of objects and characters, but they still seemed familiar and seductive. The wild animals in a domestic space seemed out of place, and yet at the same time they seemed right at home. I was really compelled by her purposefully skewed space, too. It gave kind of an uncanny feeling. And I used that as a tool in my artwork as well. My stories can border on the absurd and the nonsensical, but the lack of static meaning affords me many opportunities to continue to find new information and learn about them long after they've been made. I always see a part of myself in each character that I draw as I explore each woman's story. And through the image making process, I try to imagine often what history would be like if it were seen through the eyes of women. I think about women's struggles, how they've been alienated and misunderstood throughout different political and cultural milieus. And many of these women, their struggles revolve around these reoccurring themes for me. Pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood is one that comes up again and again for me. Domesticity, subordination, women's rights, issues with body consciousness, pressures and freedoms of sexuality, beauty, aging, depression, mortality. These are all things that continue to reoccur in my work. I continue to do research in graduate school by reading women's stories, women who have faced hardships. And the women who have gone through the largest challenges were always the ones that inspired me the most. They occupy a huge range of status and character. Some were of great power and prestige, while others were victims. But these women were queens, abolitionists, feminists, suffragists, physicians, midwives, psychoanalysts, and the list goes on. When I draw women, what I'm most interested in is confronting and dismantling a history of societal patterns that keep women from being the complicated and complex and autonomous individuals that they always have been and continue to be. And that is very empowering to me. After 2 years in graduate school, I still had 1 more year to complete. And the father of my children got a job at the University of Tampa in Tampa, Florida. And so we ended up moving to Florida. And I completed my 3rd and final year as a low residency, flying back and forth for critiques and meetings with my mentors from Florida to Michigan a few times each semester. This piece called Insidious was the first drawing that I made after I moved to Florida. It represents a time of uncertainty for me. I had a lot of apprehension about the move, and it was a whole new environment, and you can tell through this piece the whole environment, the land feels unstable, it's moving, it's shifting, the figures are sort of slipping and sliding around, and they seem to be in some sort of distress. And then there's this tardigrade, which is a microscopic creature, and it's grown up to the size of this giant looming monster, which kind of looks like a manatee. And these oddities do provoke a lot of eeriness and an uncomfortable feeling. But as I created this piece, my subconscious was driven by those emotions that I was going through. So rather than reason, I was just sort of being taken away by all of the uncertainties that I had at the time. I felt like I was in the middle of a foreign world, and it felt strange and illogical that year. So I was looking for balance in my life. So then I went back to Michigan for my MFA show, and in my final year I was honored to receive the Kendall Scholarship of Merit. I was really proud of my MFA show, and you can get a sense of the scale of these pieces here. They're quite large. The largest ones are 6 foot by 8 foot. But since graduating, I continued to make work in the same realm of women's issues and worked on honing my mixed media technique. This is one of the first pieces done after grad school. This one's called Aberration, and I'm calling into question the ways that society tries to define women by exploring the maid, mother, crone archetype, which states that women consist of 3 phases in terms of their physical reproduction, before, during, and after their ability to have a child, which I think is a very limited definition of women. Women's worth is not dependent on the capabilities of her womb or what she chooses to do with that. It's my belief that our notions of gender and femininity and sexuality as a culture need to evolve. The word aberration means departure from what's normal or usual or expected, and typically it's thought of as unwelcome. And so I think that our society, in our society, women are at risk of being thought of as an aberration if they can't produce a child or if they choose not to produce a child. I think a woman's at risk of being thought of as an aberration if she's past the birthing age as well. And I think all this is a really short-sighted way to see a woman. In 2016, my daughter Iris was born. And for a while, I did feel defined only by my role as a mother, again. And I did take a little time off from art making to focus on my family. But during this time, I continued to collect stories and experiences and ideas, and I talked to all of my friends who were mothers, and you know, I had this sort of backlog of all of this stuff I wanted to make, but I couldn't get into the studio. When a woman becomes a mother, her identity changes, even when she becomes a mother for the second time. You feel a little bit like you are not, alone, or you have a symbiotic relationship with your child. And regardless of a mother's devotion to her child, mothers are often pulled in many different directions, and it can be extremely challenging to maintain the identity and the roles, playing all those roles. So when I did get back into the studio, I made this piece called Postpartum in 2018. And it's about my experience with postpartum depression. But it's also about the shared challenges of motherhood and all the stories that I had collected from my friends and family and neighbors and people I knew who may have had similar experiences. It's a really honest and unapologetic look at how complicated it can be to be a mother and how we expect mothers to thrive in our society, yet we have sort of insufficient support from our society and government and at large. However, this piece is also about the strength of mothers, the powerful love and devotion that they have to their children, and also the ability to overcome challenges and obstacles and persevere. So this is the piece that won the Bennett Prize, and many people have asked me about it. So I'm going to spend some time talking, dissecting this one and talking about the symbols. Why is the woman's skin blue? Well, blue was intended to show calm and strength and stability within the mother's body, but it also represents a death of the autonomous self when a child is born. What does the snake mean? The division of color in the woman's skin between the head and the body is created by this snake that wraps around her neck. And historically, in many cultures, snakes are a symbol of fertility and rebirth. But also, when a snake sheds their skin, it's also a symbol of transformation and healing. What is the pink machine that's sitting next to her? That's an old, unsophisticated radio. I found that image in an antiques book, and to me it represents an outdated, outmoded form of communication. It's the struggle to speak, maybe the struggle to be heard. What is the yarn about? Well, wires from the radio turn into balls of yarn, and they gather in piles on the floor. And each ball is another woman's story being collected. But yarn also represents the burden of domestic chores that are often placed on women in the home. What are those creatures behind her? Those are trilobites. One of the earliest known groups of arthropods, existing 500 million years ago. They're one of the longest lasting and successful of the early animals before they became extinct. And their fossils have actually been found all over the planet, on every continent. And for me, they symbolize the idea of self-preservation and also the acknowledgement of the historical significance of procreation. Oh yeah, and the arm, why is she sticking her arm out of the window? Well, that symbolizes her desire for freedom. It's a longing to continue to be an individual and not solely defined by her role as a mother. But all of these explanations are up for interpretation. You know, these symbols have power because of their ability to be transient. I want you to continue to look at these pieces with a curious mind and be open to multiple interpretations. Because for me, even though I can give you some of these ideas of where my thoughts and ideas came from and some of my intentions, when I revisit a piece that I've done and maybe 6 months or a year goes by, I see new things every time, and sometimes the symbols have changed their meaning for me. This is the next piece I did after postpartum. It's called Tributary. The woman is symbolic of Mother Earth. She's sort of the embodiment of nature, in the form of a mother, and she's the life-giving source of everything that's around her. And she provides a continuous flow of energy to ensure that the ecosystem is thriving. She nurtures with her body and her mind. She's sort of meditating on the building blocks of life. This piece to me is about seeing all the women around me serving our society, nourishing and supporting it. And I'm just in awe of all the women I see around me who give and give. And I just wanted to show my gratitude for that. I wanted to support and honor women who give both physically and emotionally with the roles that they play in society. This piece is called Formidable. I explore women's strength and fortitude. A woman can be a real force to be reckoned with. And the word formidable means to inspire fear and respect, and being large and powerful. And so I wanted to show how women are really warriors in their everyday lives and capable, and continue to be capable of amazing things. This piece is called Live and Let Live. I did this one, this is the first piece of 2019. And I was thinking a lot about this sentiment, to live and let live, with the Me Too movement going on and all the issues that were surrounding abortion rights. I really felt compelled to make a piece in response to all these feelings that I had. And I feel very strongly that a woman should be able to decide what they can and can't do with their own bodies. Women's bodies should be respected and protected and thought of as sacred spaces, and to be put on a pedestal and held with reverence. And this work is also an homage to one of my idols, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's done really amazing things for gender equality and women's rights, and she's a really important role model for women today. So you'll see the woman in this piece wearing a collar, sort of like the one Ruth Bader Ginsburg would wear. And her collar has really become a symbol of her sort of unapologetic and strong feminist legacy. And then I've also done a series of smaller pieces, portraits. I did these during a time when I was studying women's headdresses from Europe, like the 14 and 1500s. I was looking at Dutch painter Roger van der Weyden. His portraits of women brought attention to me the importance of women's attire and how what women wear have really defined their roles in society and their status in society. So it was just another way of defining women and their position that I was just very interested in. And here are 3 more smaller works. These are much more recent. I've been able to exhibit these pieces over the last few years all over the country. I've been in multiple publications such as American Art Collector, Beautiful Bazaar. I've had the good fortune of connecting with a gallery in New York. RJD Gallery now represents me. And you can see more of my work at my website, AnekaIngold.com. You can follow me on Instagram, and you can find works available on Artsy. And in closing, the last few slides, I want to touch on what it's meant for me to win the Bennett Prize. In May of 2019, I was chosen out of 10 finalists to be named the inaugural winner of the Bennett Prize, which was created by Stephen Allen Bennett and Dr. Elaine Schmidt, along with the Pittsburgh Foundation. They created a stipend, grant and aid award in the amount of $50,000 to go to one woman figurative realist painter whose work demonstrates excellence in the genre. The founders and organizers of the Bennett Prize believe that it will not only elevate women in the visual arts, but also inspire a new generation of artists to make representational paintings that are culturally and critically relevant and engaging. And here's an image of me with Stephen Bennett and Elaine Schmidt the day that I won that prize. It's an extreme honor to have received this award, and it gives me a sense that there is a beginning of real tangible change in the way that women are seen and heard by the art world, and hopefully the world at large. But I strive to be an ambassador for more change, and I can't wait to see what the Bennett Prize does for the future of women in the arts. So that's all I have. It's been a privilege to speak with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, or you can go back through slides if you want me to.
The larger paintings, the 6x8s, approximately how long did it take you to complete those?
Maybe like 3 months, I think. I did one each semester. Those are the largest pieces I've ever done. I haven't actually worked that large since I graduated from my MFA, but 3 to 4 months because I just did one each semester. Yeah.
These pieces, are they on the paper that you sealed? They are. And did you use the combination again of the acrylic and the pencil and the... Thank you. They're great.
In quite a few of your pieces, and both of these, birds are a recurring theme. And in fact, I think in one or two I saw those, there were birds, but I interpret them almost as insects, maybe flies or bees.
There are some insects in there. There are some insects in there too. There are birds and there are bees and and insects and flies and things like that as well.
Yeah, it's recurring enough that it has to have some...
There are certain symbols that come up again and again for me, and I don't really analyze too much when I use it another time in another piece as maybe something different. But I think that birds can symbolize many different things, you know, there's especially different kinds of birds, but often I think it has to do with the idea of freedom and liberation and things like that.
Thank you.
Good question. These are large paintings, but do you ever do 2 different sets of paintings at a time, or works at a time?
I do. Usually, if I'm working on one large piece, I'm just focused on that one. But the smaller portrait ones are like 22 by 30, and sometimes I'll have 2 or 3 hung up in a row, and I'll because sometimes I'm waiting for certain areas to dry, and then I'll just go to the next, one, and I'll just start working on something there. And it's nice when I can work on multiple pieces at once. I don't have enough room in my studio to work on really large ones, like 2 or 3 at a time. But also I find them like so engaging that sometimes I can't think about anything else but the one large piece. But when I do several of the small pieces at once, they start to talk to each other and they start to, I'm like, well, what do you think
One of the portraits, there was an amulet. Is that the prehistoric Venus?
That's the Venus of one of the doors. Yes.
For your painting, did you paint using a easel, or did you bring your canvas against the wall and put it on the wall?
I work on the wall, but I have a piece of a really large, it's like actually a couple pieces of really large drywall screwed into the wall, on top of the wall that's in the room where I work. And then I kind of patched and sanded that all down so it's all smooth. So it's a pretty big space. But I put the paper up there, I kind of stretch it out with some tape or pins and stuff like that, just to get it to stay, and then I gesso it. And then I usually take it down so I can move it wherever I want it to go. But yeah, I just always work right up against the wall. Sometimes on a ladder, sometimes I'm sitting on the floor, I don't know, sometimes I'm standing.
What's the symbolism, or is there, do her feet just hurt, or is there symbolism of her feet in the water?
Oh yeah, her feet are in a pool of water.
Yeah, is that symbolic too, or?
I think so. They're sort of like, I guess just off the top of my head, I And when people put me on the spot, I'm like, oh no, I mean, there's probably like 5 different reasons I did that, but there's something about bathing, there's something about baptism, there's something about cleaning and purity, and I mean, I think there's all kinds of stuff in there. Yeah.
What does your son think about the artist as you?
What does my son think about me? Actually, it's my daughter who's a lot more opinionated. My daughter's 3 and my son is 10 now. So, yeah, they see me working in the studio all the time because my studio is my bedroom. So they come in, they'll hand me that, and they'll watch me work. Iris really wants to make work with me. She wants to draw on or paint on my drawings all the time. So I have to set her up with something else. And Spencer is just kind of like, that's cool, Mom. I like that, you know, but yeah, she's always asking me questions. Mom, why did you do that? What does that mean? But my kids are very involved, and they're little artists too, so it's, you know, it's all good.
I'm curious about how you structure your time. Do you drink a cup of coffee and get up and go paint, or midnight, or when it hits, or specific times?
Well, my schedule changes every semester. I teach at University of Tampa and also at Hillsborough Community College as an adjunct professor. And so it changes each semester how many classes I get and how many days of the week I'm working and what hours of the day I'm working. So I just kind of fit it in when I can. I do find that if I don't just make myself start working, and I think I have to wait for a special time to do it, then things don't happen. So I have to just start. And then once I've started, then I don't want to stop. Then I'm like, well, I have 5 minutes in between these 2 classes. I'm going to run home and quickly a couple more marks and then go back. You know, I get really excited about it. But I do think that nighttime, after my kids are asleep, is the most quiet time of the day. We're not distracted by anything. And then sometimes, I guess I think that's probably those are probably the most productive times for me, where like I just get an idea or I just move forward with something.
What do you teach? I mean, I know it's art, but from what perspective?
I teach foundations drawing and figure drawing at UT, and I teach Visual Studies 1 and Visual Studies 2 at HCC, which is essentially like a 2D design class and a 3D design class. But 3D design, I don't tell my students, isn't really my forte. 2D drawing is really my area of expertise. I mean, I just love drawing. I love drawing from the model with my students. Thank you so much for listening.